What's happening, y'all? Welcome inside the Fantasy Stock Exchange. Danny and Bush coming at you with some boomer bust players. We're going to be talking about some running backs, some quarterbacks that are maybe a little risky in fantasy this year. They have a high ceiling, but a low floor, big high range of outcomes type of players. If you guys enjoy this video at any point, as always, leave a like down below, comment any of your thoughts, subscribe to the channel if you're new. We just hit 4K this past weekend. We're trying to hit 5,000 by August 1st, so we got less than a month until then. So make sure you hit that subscribe button if you haven't already done so. Danny, how you doing today?
Doing well. Yeah, ready to discuss these boom or bust quarterbacks and running backs in this video, as you mentioned. It's going to be fun because we talk about busts all the time. We talk about sleepers. We talk about the guys at the top that can win you your leagues. We don't necessarily talk about the range of outcomes for guys quite often. So going over boom bust kind of gives you an idea of what these guys' range of outcomes in terms of their ceiling versus floor could be, and whether you're willing to measure or take the risk in terms of investing in these players. So ready to get started.
Right. So we're going to hit the intro and then we're going to get right into this. Okay, so we picked two quarterbacks, one each, and then four total running backs, two each. And what we're focusing on guys that are going early, right? Because we could be like, oh yeah, the running back 47 in ADP is boomer bust. Like, no shit. So we're going to focus on guys that are going a little earlier in your draft so that if they do bust, it hurts you a lot more than if somebody that you drafted in the 10th round busts. So we're going to start with Jalen Hurts. Danny's got his completely non-biased take about Jalen Hurts as a Dallas Cowboys fan.
Yeah, and again, I don't mind Jalen Hurts from a redraft perspective. I get the allure. The ceiling is absolutely there. I mean, we're talking about a comparison that a lot of people want to make similar to what Lamar Jackson was in 2018 prior to taking that boost up in 2019. However, as we see from last year, his game logs, very fine player. The rushing was there. And overall, that's basically what you're investing into Jalen Hurts. If he can be that elite Konami code rushing tile quarterback. As you guys see, he displayed that he was adept last year, 301 rushing yards and 51 carries in the final 5 games to go along with 3 rushing touchdowns. However, we're still talking about a player that was PFF's 55th graded passer last year. You heard that right. There's only 32 teams in the NFL, so one quarterback per team. He was the 55th graded Packer. So he's about a mid-level backup grade in terms of being a passer. He was 42nd in adjusted completion percentage and had the 38th best pass rating in the league, completing 52% of his passes and a 6-4 touchdown interception ratio, which, again, it's going to be sufficient in fantasy football. But if he starts struggling as a passer, this could very well be a situation where, say by week 4, they're not impressed with what's going on with Jalen Hurts. Maybe they want to try something different at the quarterback position. I could very well see that being the case for the Eagles, who, quite frankly, I guess he was a second-round pick for them, but second-round pick from a quarterback position is not a high investment. We got to get that out of our heads. When we're talking about running backs, receivers, other positions for the most part, second-round pick, you view it, oh, no, that's very good capital. A second-round quarterback isn't really much in terms of draft capital because you see every year 5-6 guys go within the first 50 picks. So Jalen Hurts, I just don't know if he struggles early on, if this team's going to say, yeah, 17 games, this is our guy. However, though, if he does stick and that rushing is there, we could be talking about the third most mobile quarterback in the league behind Lamar, behind Kyler. And if he does hit his ceiling, QB8 is going to be a bargain comparatively to where he could finish.
Yeah, absolutely. The boom is the allure of Kyler Murray and Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, these guys that provide that elite rushing ceiling. The question marks, as you just outlined, is can he at least be capable as a passer? Because last year he was not capable as a passer. And you can see in those game logs that you referenced, he really only had one good game against Arizona, right? And in that game, he needed passing production to be good in that game because he had the rushing production in pretty much all of the other games, but he didn't have much in the way of passing. So the fact that Jalen Hurts can improve as a passer, hopefully this year with Dallas Goedert coming back, obviously they drafted Devontae Smith, finally give him what we both think is a number 1 receiver. That should really help him in terms of a passing perspective. But like you said, this guy is boomer bust and primarily due to his price, right? Because he is going as the quarterback 8. He's going as a top 10 quarterback. And we were talking about this pre-show. He's actually closer to Justin Herbert, who's the QB 7, than he is to Tom Brady, who's the QB 9.
Yeah, and I was actually going to mention that. If you want to make the case, I want to take Jalen Hurts over Brady, Stafford, Tannehill because of the rushing. I want to take a risk, especially in a one quarterback league. Okay, so be it. The fact that he's currently going within a half round of Justin Herbert, who may have just had the best rookie season of all time, while Jalen Hurts showed clearly that he struggled as a rusher or as a passer. Sorry, he was good as a rusher. I just don't understand where this ADP is coming from. Like, okay, if he was like an 8th, 9th round quarterback, good on it. I'm fine with taking the risk there. I think it's plenty of upside at that spot. But where he's currently going, where are you baking in the risk? You're not. You're taking him in the 6th round right now, where you could be having, as we mentioned, his teammate Devonta Smith, Jerry Jeudy, Justin Herbert going within a half round ahead of him. I just don't see the value that people are currently taking Jalen Hurts with.
Yeah, it's something that I'm not willing to do, but I do agree that the ceiling is there.
And yeah, like to give an overall summary, as I mentioned, if you're talking about range of outcomes, we're kind of going to do this with every player. Where exactly is the ceiling? Where is the floor? The ceiling for me, you're talking about a tier 2 quarterback, in my opinion, right after the Kyler Murray, Dak Prescott, Mahomes, Lamar area. I definitely think he can be a 20-plus point per game scorer because of the rushing. However, if he still struggles as a passer, if the offense isn't as good as we think it could be, again, let's just say hypothetically Devonta Smith isn't that absolute superstar that we expect, the rest of the receiving core can't suffice, and Dallas Goedert really can't do it on its own because, quite frankly, Zach Ertz is not the player that he once was. This offense may struggle, and if that's the case and Jalen Hurts is struggling as a passer, there's a scenario where he's not even a top 12 quarterback. And if you're currently taking a guy like that in the top 7 rounds, it's risky. You got to have some cojones to do it. So good on you if you guys are able to take that risk. But at his current 6th round ADP, that's not for me.
Yeah, and that's what you just said is the key for me. The 6th round ADP. The QB8 price, I don't hate. It's the 6th round ADP that he's going at. If he was going QB8 in the 9th round, then it's a fine pick for me because of the rushing. We know the ceiling. So let's get into the next quarterback, and then we'll get on to these running backs. Trevor Lawrence currently going off the board as the QB 15. He's, in my opinion, he's one of the most boomer bust quarterbacks in fantasy next year. I think the risk is pretty obvious, right? He's a rookie quarterback, so that's a risk in and of itself. With a first-time head coach, it could be very bumpy early on while players get adjusted to the system and Urban Meyer figures out how to coach in the NFL. He doesn't really have a good offensive line, right? There's a lot of moving parts schematically on the offensive line and in the receiving personnel, with Marvin Jones coming in, with Etienne coming in as the running back, and Laviska Shenault and DJ Chark still being young players. The boom, basically, where you get out of Trevor Lawrence is what we saw from Justin Herbert last year, right? That's where the boom comes with Trevor Lawrence. Lawrence can provide that elite level of play right away if he is the player and the prospect that we all think he can be. And he'll elevate the players around him as well. And we could suddenly see this offense jump from, I don't know, a bottom 10 offense in the league to a top 15 offense in the league if Lawrence can be that guy. And Lawrence should also have high value as a runner as well. In a spread offense, the type of scheme that Urban Meyer runs, they run a lot of RPOs, and they're going to use Etienne and Lawrence, who have had a lot of experience running RPOs together at Clemson. They're going to use those guys on the goal line in the red zone, and Lawrence is going to keep some of those. And we saw at Clemson, Trevor Lawrence had 17 rushing touchdowns over the past 2 seasons. And a big reason for that is the threat of Etienne running, right? On the RPO, they're focused on Etienne because he's a great goal line runner, and Lawrence is able to just keep the ball and run it in himself. So we've seen them that utilize that kind of style of play, and that fits exactly what Urban Meyer runs in his offense as well. There's a picture that you can paint that this whole situation crashes and burns. And there's a situation that you can paint that Lawrence is so special that he overcomes some of the question marks. And I already talked about this with DJ Chark in the wide receiver rankings video that I did on Monday, but he could elevate DJ Chark into T.Y. Hilton caliber of a fantasy asset. He could elevate Laviska Shenault into, I don't know, like a very much better version of Curtis Samuel, right? Like he could make these guys a lot better simply by his presence. So that's the appeal with Trevor Lawrence. I actually really like him at his current price. QB 15 is a little rich, I suppose, but at this point in the draft, you're getting him, in the 10th round or so. You can swing back and take a Kirk Cousins in the 13th round to protect your ass in case Trevor Lawrence doesn't work out.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll get into it a bit as well because his teammates actually also on this list we'll get into, but you outlined it perfectly with Trevor Lawrence. The situation on face value we saw last year, the offense was not good. They had one of the lowest volume outputs in the red zone last year. Overall, the offense just wasn't getting inside the 20-yard line. However, Trevor Lawrence is the type of talent that if he lands in that situation and Urban Meyer isn't a complete flop of a coach and those young, talented assets on the outside in the backfield can perform up to the level they're capable of, we could be talking about Trevor Lawrence, again, as you mentioned, as the next Justin Herbert, as that next 30 passing touchdown, 300 rushing yard type of big armed mobile quarterback. He absolutely has the talent to do that. The thing that kind of gives me pause is how are their tendencies going to be? How is he going to adjust? How is this team going to call plays? Is Urban Meyer going to use his players in the best position? Because everything in this offseason just kind of seems quirky with what they're doing. But Trevor Lawrence is the ultimate trump card because we saw at Clemson as a freshman come and he is used to stepping up into pressure. And there's not many more pressure spots in the NFL than what the Jacksonville Jaguars are currently at, given all the people scrutinizing what they've done this offseason. So as I'll mention with Travis Etienne as well, I absolutely agree. If Trevor Lawrence hits, again, we could be talking about a guy who's taken in the Justin Herbert range next year, taken in that 6th, 7th round. Basically where Jalen Hurts is going right now, Trevor Lawrence could be there next year. So I absolutely agree. I love Trevor Lawrence, and I do agree that while the ceiling and floor are very wide, I am more than fine making that capital investment into Trevor Lawrence, given the fact that I do believe in the player that much.
Yeah, and a bit of in-season advice, too. If you don't want to draft Trevor Lawrence, I think there's a good chance that he might get out to a bit of a slow start and be available on your waiver wire in a one-quarterback league. And then you can just pick him up and stash him at that point. And then once the offense gets its legs under them and figures some things out, then he could really take a step forward towards the back half of the season, like we saw from Baker Mayfield in his rookie season. So I definitely could see a situation like that playing out as well if he's not able to just come in and get out to a hot start right away. All right, so off of the quarterbacks, now we're going to get into some running backs, and we're going to start with a guy that both me and Danny have made our thoughts on pretty clearly. And even though I love this guy, I totally agree that he is a boomer bust type of player.
Yep, absolutely. I talked about him last week with Double Moose Smarts. That's going to be J.K. Dobbins. We're talking about a guy that's currently going off the board as the RB17, 32nd overall, finding his way in that mid-third round of your drafts. When you're talking about J.K. Dobbins, it's quite simple. He's one of the most efficient backs in the league, one of the best offenses in the league, and showed last year, unlimited touches, he was still able to turn 152 total touches, or just about 10 per game, into 925 yards from scrimmage and 9 touchdowns, seeing above 6 yards per touch on the season, top 3 in yards per touch, and number 1 overall according to Player Profiler in true yards per carry. So we know what he is. Unlimited touches, he was still able to produce an RB2 level season just last year. And we're talking about a guy that if he gets that bump, we're talking about 80 vacated opportunities from Mark Ingram this past year going into next year. If he gets a slight bump, we're talking about a guy 200 to 225 opportunity range, kind of similar to what Aaron Jones is. He could break fantasy football. I genuinely believe this could be the next top 5 running back if he's at his ceiling, if he's getting the touch workload to suffice what he was able to do last year, because he's always going to be an efficient player, given his talent, given that offense, given the threat of Lamar Jackson. All he needs are the touches, which is why he's risky in his own right, because if he doesn't get those touches, guess what? His floor is going to be a lot lower than a lot of players going in that range. We're talking about just after the Joe Mixon, Najee Harris type of area, where we can project very safe workloads for those guys. We can't necessarily do the same with J.K. Dobbins.
Right. And I think the thing that I always like to do in fantasy, is just a general philosophy of mine, is to bet on very talented players to receive the volume, right? And I went over that in an article that I wrote about Swift, Gibson, and Dobbins, talking about when you're very efficient as a rookie, generally speaking, coaching staffs reward you with more volume. And I think that's what's going to happen with J.K. Dobbins. The question is, how much does it actually, quantify into real volume? Because there's a world where J.K. Dobbins is a bust for fantasy, right? He might still be the same efficient player that he was his rookie season, but you never know when to start the guy, or he busts all the time in your lineup because Gus Edwards is stealing goal line carries from him. Lamar Jackson's still running the ball 15 to 18 times a game. J.K. Dobbins getting 11 carries for 65 yards a game, and if he doesn't score a touchdown, he's terrible in your lineup. That's definitely a possibility with J.K. Dobbins, but the boom is really hard to project, right? It's a very ambiguous situation. It's hard for people to invest in that early in drafts, and I understand why. So if you don't like J.K. Dobbins, I understand passing on him, but I do think there's a world where this guy completely takes over this backfield and Gus Edwards fades into like a 5 to 8 carry type of running back. And they use this guy, J.K. Dobbins, on the goal line like crazy. And he was the most efficient running back in the NFL on the goal line. And we watched Mark Ingram 2 years ago finish as a top 10 running back because of touchdowns in the Ravens offense and because of the efficiency that having a quarterback like Lamar Jackson allows you to produce.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm glad you mentioned his efficiency on the goal line because as we saw, he was absolutely one of the most efficient players on the goal line last year. A 71% success rate on the goal line, which was one of the best in the league. Had 31 total attempts and turned that into 9 rushing touchdowns. This guy just knows how to punch in the end zone. Similar, as I mentioned, to a guy like Aaron Jones. Aaron Jones knows how to score the football. Aaron Jones gets a lot of his value in fantasy football from scoring touchdowns. Well, J.K. Dobbins on the number 1 rush offense in the league, talking about the highest neutral game script run rate in the league, 4th highest red zone run rate in the entire league with the Baltimore Ravens. This is a team that's going to get into the red zone quite a lot and is going to run the ball when they're down there. And not to mention, they're vacating 12 total vacated red zone carries from Mark Ingram last year. And while that could be supplemented in the backfield, J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards were only at a 31-27 split last year with J.K. Dobbins as a rookie, with J.K. Dobbins really only coming on, quite frankly, late. If J.K. Dobbins takes that next step in his development, if J.K. Dobbins earns the trust of this coaching staff and he nears that 40 attempt range in terms of red zone touches, we could be talking about a 15 touchdown back, 17 touchdown back. That is in the range of outcomes for J.K. Dobbins. And if he's able to really encapsulate that, we could be talking, I'm not going to say Alvin Kamara because he does so much in the receiving game as well. But in terms of touchdowns, we could be talking about an Alvin Kamara type of player in that regard, scoring 15 rushing touchdowns, 16 rushing touchdowns, as we've seen year in and year out from guys like that.
Right. And we could also, on the Alvin Kamara point, I know everybody's like, yeah, but J.K. Dobbins isn't going to catch the ball because Lamar Jackson doesn't throw to his running backs. It's like, well, can you blame Lamar Jackson? He hasn't had a running back to throw to in the past couple of years. J.K. Dobbins could be the guy that makes Lamar Jackson throw to his running backs because he hasn't had, like the best, who's the best receiving running back that Lamar Jackson's had in his career? Justice Hill? Like, that's like legitimately what we're talking about here. And J.K. Dobbins doesn't need 70, 90 receptions to be a good contributor in the receiving game. If he catches 40, 50 balls, which I think is very much in the range of outcomes for him, he can, reach that elite ceiling that I think he has. But again, the risks are very real. Like the risks are Gus Edwards makes this a 50-50 share in an already minimized backfield because Lamar Jackson carries the ball so much. So that's the risk with J.K. Dobbins, but I do think the ceiling is higher than people think.
Yep, absolutely agree. That when you're talking about J.K. Dobbins, the more so of the risk here is going to be with that expected receiving output and overall volume comparatively to other backs when measuring ceiling. But when you're talking about the situation, I know you broke this down in your league winners video where basically analyzing guys that have scored 20 plus points per game in recent years. J.K. Dobbins, from a situational standpoint, talking about offensive ranking points per game, PFF run blocking grade, age, team wins, efficiency, yards per touch. He is basically green or orange in every single one of those with minimal concerns from an injury standpoint. So from a situational standpoint, he probably has the best running back situation in the entire NFL when you're comparing it to other backs. So if you're talking about that and you're talking about the fact that he gives you so much from an efficiency basis, watch out, because again, that ceiling, as I mentioned, could be in that fringe top 5, could be that next league-winning third-round pick, or as you said, Gus Edwards kind of eats into him. Lamar Jackson takes away some of the goal line opportunities. We're talking about a boom-bust, low-end RB2, which if you're spending third-round draft capital on, you're probably not too happy about.
Right, and you just said something that'll probably piss some people off. You said that he has one of the best running back situations in the league. The thing that a lot of people probably are going to fail to recognize is that the Ravens ran the ball the most in the entire NFL last year.
By far.
They're like, yeah, but Lamar Jackson runs the ball a lot. It's like, well, if you remove Lamar Jackson's carries, he had 159 carries last year. The Ravens ran the ball 555 times. So we're talking about 400 attempts for running backs in that backfield. And like we said, if J.K. Dobbins can take 250 of those attempts or 225 even of that backfield, we're talking about a guy that can legitimately be a 5 yards per carry, 5.5 yards per carry type of running back.
Absolutely. We're talking about a team, as I mentioned too, in neutral game scripts. Let's keep this in mind. They had a 4% higher run rate than the next highest team in the New England Patriots. And they were one of only two teams in the league, along with the New England Patriots, to run more than they threw in neutral game scripts. We know the plan of action with the Ravens. As much as they want to improve the passing game, I do think they do take strides in kind of closing the gap a little bit. We're still talking about a team that their bread and butter, their identity of this team is a physical, explosive, consistent running game. And when you have Lamar Jackson and J.K. Dobbins really headlining that in the backfield, it's not too hard to see why.
Yeah. So that's enough about J.K. Dobbins. Let's move on to another sophomore running back who is very boomer bust, in my opinion, and that's DeAndre Swift, currently going off the board as the RB16. And this coaching staff, when you look at what the Lions have assembled as their coaching staff, it makes it very easy to see what the boom appeal is for DeAndre Swift, right? The Saints influence with Dan Campbell, the Chargers influence with Anthony Lynn. We know what those guys have done for the running backs in their respective backfields. We want DeAndre Swift to get the Alvin Kamara, the Austin Eckler treatment as a running back. Those backs, those Alvin Kamara and Austin Eckler, have been top 5 running backs without seeing 350 touches, 300 touches, even like 280 touches sometimes. And instead, what those guys get are the most important touches on the field, right? They get 100 plus targets. They get the goal line work. And we know that Swift is perhaps the most talented of all of these second-year running backs, especially as a receiver. I would say probably coming out as a prospect, he was the most talented receiving back of any of those guys. And last year, he was able to command a top 10 target share as a rookie running back among all running backs. And he ranked 6th in yards per route runner among all running backs as well. And the issue is where the bust factor comes in, right? The bust factor is the downside of this offense. If they are the 2020 Jaguars type of offense, right, where we see a workhorse in James Robinson score very few times, that's what the downside is with DeAndre Swift, and that's what everybody's worried about. But I think the more optimistic outcome and the more likely outcome probably for the Lions offense is a Panthers level offense with Teddy Bridgewater, what they were last year, the type of scoring offense that they were. Goff is a capable quarterback. He's not terrible. He's not Gardner Minshew or Jake Luton or, Mike Glennon. He has a great offensive line. Now with Penei Sewell, their offensive line is really good. He has a great tight end in TJ Hawkinson. He has a great running back in DeAndre Swift. And if any of these receivers can show anything, if they can contribute in any way, whether it's Amon-Ra St. Brown, whether it's Brashad Perriman, anybody else that they might sign before the season even starts too, this offense might not be half bad. It might be like the 20th best offense in the league. But that could really go a long way to contribute to DeAndre Swift, because I think everybody is projecting the Lions offense to be the worst in the league, like the single worst offense in the league. This team's going to have the first overall pick. And I don't think that's necessarily what's going to happen. I think they're probably going to have a top 10 pick, but I don't think they're going to be the worst team in the league. And we know what the other factor is, right? There's another factor that's causing Swift to be a boomer bust type of player, and it's Jamal Williams, who, say what you want about Jamal Williams, he's a coach's best friend. He's great in pass protection. He's reliable in the passing game. He ranked number 1 last year in catch rate on receiving plays. So you throw the ball to him and he's going to come down with it. And sometimes that's all coaches are looking for, especially on like a 3rd and 2 type play. And they might pull DeAndre Swift off the field for something like that. And he could absolutely be a pest for DeAndre Swift. And in a worst case scenario, he can make this a 50-50 timeshare. And that's how DeAndre Swift busts in fantasy.
Yeah, potentially. It's kind of funny because this is very similar to what we kind of saw a couple years ago with the 2019 Chargers, where they got that more physical, better profile for a bigger physical back with Jamal Williams. I kind of see that with like a Melvin Gordon parallel. But the main draw here for what we would want with DeAndre Swift was how they used Austin Eckler from a versatility standpoint. And you guys should be able to see this on the screen. I'm sure Bush is showing this. But Dan Campbell and Anthony Lynn coming over, in their previous jobs these past 2 years, their main running backs, their main receiving backs, their main talents that they're able to use in a variety of ways, Austin Eckler and Alvin Kamara. I get that they're the 2 best receiving backs in the game, most likely, but talking about DeAndre Swift, he's very talented in his own right. Maybe he's using that variety. Talking about the 2 backs, 36 catches of over 15 plus yards gained in the past 3 seasons. Aside from Christian McCaffrey and David Johnson, nobody else eclipsed 30. Those 2 tied for first at 36. So we see when they have that level of elite receiving talent out of the backfield, they're able to get the ball into their hands in space. And we've seen they use them down the field. They're able to split Alvin Kamara out wide, Austin Eckler out wide, and get them running versatile routes. I do think DeAndre Swift is the type of back that can contribute in that regard. And we saw last year when he was used, he is a very talented receiving back in space. Maybe he gets that bump in targets. Maybe we see they lost those 2 wide receivers in the offseason. This offense could really be funneled around TJ Hawkinson and DeAndre Swift through the passing game. Do we really expect Quintez Cephas to earn a 70-plus target role? Tyrell Williams, who hasn't been healthy in 3 years. Freaking Brashad Perriman, who the only good stretch of his career just so happened to be with your Tampa Bay Buccaneers 2 years ago. I just don't see anything aside from maybe Amon-Ra and TJ Hawkinson to really take away from what DeAndre Swift could be in store for in the receiving game. However, you outlined it perfectly. If this offense is hot buns, if DeAndre Swift doesn't get 100 targets, we could be talking about a guy that is just unusable. Not unusable, but
he'll be a DFS guy. Like that's what he'll be, relegated to. He'll be a back end RB2 in fantasy, and back end RB2s never help anybody, right? Like you're never going to win a championship. Even if DeAndre Swift was your 3rd running back, which he probably won't be given where he's being drafted, he's not going to help your fantasy team if he finishes RB20 this year. He needs to be a top 10 running back. And the only way he can get there is if he gets there in the receiving game, because the touchdown opportunities outside of him creating on his own probably won't be that high. And the carries are going to be split between him and Jamal Williams.
I will say, though, he was actually very efficient when it came to getting opportunities inside the 20. For reference, he turned 20 rushing attempts inside the red zone into 8 rushing touchdowns and 9 attempts inside the 5-yard line into 6 rushing touchdowns. If this guy's the engine of the offense and he's the only one scoring, that could be his return on value as well with the touchdowns and the receiving game. But yeah, it is risky betting on guys in bad offense. I know people want to make this narrative. Oh, well, if you're fading DeAndre Swift, don't fade Christian, or you better fade Christian McCaffrey. Christian McCaffrey is a 95% opportunity share running back. Are we shocked at all if DeAndre
Swift's ceiling is like 70% opportunity share with Jamal? Like Jamal Williams isn't a bad running back. Even at the absolute ceiling, DeAndre Swift is not getting more than 70 to 72% or something like around that range of the opportunity share, which would still be like a top 10 opportunity share in the league. But Christian McCaffrey's a unicorn. Like he gets way too much receive. Like if Christian McCaffrey was on an elite offense, we'd be talking about a 30 fantasy points per game.
I absolutely see the appeal in this guy's ceiling. I mean, we could be talking about a guy based on talent alone. He was my RB1 prior to the combine. He could eclipse that area. We could be seeing a guy that gets the 100 targets, can contribute at the very minimum in the touchdown game. I don't necessarily expect him like J.K. Dobbins to be in contention for leading the league in touchdowns, but we're talking about a guy that can contribute, let's say 10 to 12 next year. I think he could probably be in that range, but the floor is undeniably low. So overall, when you're looking at this situation, probably fringe top 7's his ceiling, while his floor is probably around the RB20. So I do think because of that range of outcomes, the 3rd round ADP is probably a fair assessment at his current value. But the 3rd round, basically, we talked about J.K. Dobbins. We talked about him. You can mention other guys like David Montgomery and Chris Carson in this range. It's all these boomer bust running backs that we don't necessarily know where to project. So it makes sense, though. I don't know why Joe Mixon isn't in this range. Kill me now, because you guys were probably expecting to see him on this video. But yeah, I love DeAndre Swift, but he's just so risky in terms of evaluating where exactly he lies in that mix.
Yeah, I think the 3rd round, and this is, I mean, I guess we should probably talk about this with everybody. Boomer bust type of players, there's always a point in the draft where you're willing to take that risk. And for me, that's at the end of the 3rd round. If DeAndre Swift is there at the end of the 3rd round, early 4th round, I'm absolutely taking that risk, because I understand even in a bad situation, he does have a high ceiling because of that receiving work upside. If you play in any kind of PPR leagues, he's going to contribute in that facet. So there's always a point in the draft where these guys are worth the risk. And speaking of a point in the draft where these guys are worth the risk, I don't think this guy's currently going where I'm going to be picking him. And that's Najee Harris, who's the next running back on this list. He's currently going as RB14, and he's actually going a lot higher in drafts in terms of ADP than a guy like DeAndre Swift. There's actually a 13 pick discrepancy between Najee Harris and DeAndre Swift. So we're talking about a mid-second round running back right now. And Danny said he disagrees with this pre-show in terms of is Najee Harris boomer bust? But in my opinion, we all know where the bust will come from. If Najee Harris is a bust, we'll know that it's because the offensive line is terrible. Trey Turner, who was banged up last year and regressed for the Chargers, is the only suitable offensive lineman on the Pittsburgh Steelers now that they've released David DeCastro.
I'll quickly say, I think he was the lowest graded right guard in the entire league last year.
Right.
according to
And
PFF.
he was good for the
Yeah.
Panthers, but he wasn't good last year. And
Yeah.
I have major question marks about Ben's ability to lead this offense. So that's where the bust factor comes with Najee Harris. The fact that he might not be a very highly, efficient running back. He might be like a 3.9 yards per carry because his offensive line's terrible. He might only score 6 rushing touchdowns because the offense isn't very good. And on top of that, Le'Veon Bell in his prime never was a high touchdown scorer either. So they might just throw the ball in the red zone for God knows what reason. But here's where the boom can come in, right? Najee Harris might have a Jonathan Taylor-like start to his season or Todd Gurley in 2016 because the situation is bad. But Harris's boom comes from the volume, and particularly in the receiving game. In 2018, we saw a first-round rookie running back in Saquon Barkley come into the NFL with a washed-up veteran quarterback in Eli Manning and receive 121 targets as a rookie, 91 receptions. And I think that's where Harris can get his ceiling. And if Harris is phenomenal this year for fantasy, it'll be because he's a featured pass catcher for the team. He'll need to create some plays on his own as well based on pure ability, like the way Saquon did. That's how Saquon got a lot of his touchdowns. A lot of his big plays were just him being Saquon. Najee Harris isn't quite the elite athlete and, breakaway play guy that Saquon is, but I do think he can create a lot on his own, and that's where he's going to get his ceiling from. So he's too risky of a pick, in my opinion, in the second round. I need to get this guy in the third round for me to draft him, but I do think the ceiling is there because he's going to see, 250 carries, and they're probably not going to be very efficient carries. He'll probably only have like 1,100 yards rushing, maybe at most. And, the receiving work is actually where he's going to get his ceiling because it's going to get him in space, going to allow him to be elusive and create big plays on his own.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's funny I mentioned, no, he wasn't the lowest graded offensive guard. Sorry, my bad. He's the second lowest graded. So I was a little off there. Sorry for the skewed analysis. My bad. And, you also got Okerafor, or however you pronounce that, at left tackle, garnering a 70th rated grade out of 79 possibly graded tackles. Yeah, the risk there is that offensive line is complete dog fart, and he has no running lanes to go. He's averaging 3.5 yards per carry, similar to what Melvin Gordon did as a rookie. And he's RB21 on the year because of sheer volume. That is the risk. However, as you mentioned, the ceiling here could be the fact that he, as good as Travis Etienne is as a receiving back, I do believe that Najee Harris is the best receiving back to come out of college this past year. And as you mentioned, if Big Ben is under duress because of that offensive line, because he lacks mobility, the closest asset or the closest outlet that's going to be to him, aside from maybe Juju Smith-Schuster, because that guy goes nowhere down the field, is going to be Najee Harris. So could we be talking about a guy that has 70, 75 receptions as a rookie? Absolutely. And if you're getting that type of contribution in the receiving game in any type of PPR format, he's a near lock to finish top 10 in that regard. But the risk is there. And as you mentioned, at the top of the second round, he's currently going about the 205 you mentioned?
He's going at the 18th pick overall. So it's like, about the 205. 206, yeah.
That's a little bit rich for my blood, considering the receivers that are going to be available there, considering that's right around the Aaron Jones type of area. You're starting to get into that second tier tight ends after Kelsey with Waller and Kittle, who I think are safer picks. It's risky, but I love the player. I love the talent. It's just the situation there is just such a head scratcher to me that I can't take this guy anywhere higher than probably the end of the second round is probably where I'd be tempted at taking him. But again, getting him in that mid-second round ahead of the guys that I mentioned, you're talking about also a DeAndre Hopkins type of player, Devontae Adams, Stephon Diggs. I just can't fathom taking any of them or taking him over any of them.
Yeah, I currently have him ranked as my 23rd overall player. So I would take him, I guess, right at the turn of the third round. So if you were able to get Christian McCaffrey with your first pick and Najee Harris is there at the back of the second round, then I would be willing to do something like that. But I don't think I'm going to get him there. That's the problem, right? Because everybody's in love with the volume. And I know all the big fantasy analysts out there are going to be telling people to draft this guy because of that volume. And that's going to keep his ADP probably in the early second round, which to me is just a little bit too rich for my blood. I'd rather take Stephon Diggs, DeAndre Hopkins, Calvin Ridley, like you said, those two tight ends potentially. I would just much rather take guys like that and then Antonio Gibson, Aaron Jones, running backs ahead of them than I would take Najee Harris at that point in the draft, just because I do think the floor is quite low for this guy. He could definitely be a case of bad volume this coming season.
Yeah, and that leads into the next player that we're going to have, and that's going to be, I alluded to him when I was talking about Najee in terms of receiving backs, but the second Jacksonville Jaguar of the video in Travis Etienne. He's currently going off the board as the RB23, 56th overall. When you're talking about this team and the Jacksonville Jaguars last year, James Robinson was running the show. 85.2% opportunity share was the highest in the league. And as much as I love Travis Etienne, are they completely going to phase James Robinson out? I do think that opportunity share is probably going to be around cut in half, but I don't expect Travis Etienne is just going to come in and command 20, 21 opportunities per game. No, he's probably going to be in that 15, 16 type of area, kind of splitting this backfield as a whole between Urban Meyer. However, is it in the range of outcomes where this guy is one of the top 5 to 6 leaders in terms of receiving targets at the running back position? I think that's in the range of outcomes. Is he automatically going to be ushered out of the red zone? I don't think that's the case, because as we see, James Robinson was pretty average as an overall red zone rushing back last year, turned 31 total attempts into 7 rushing touchdowns, a 61% success rate on a team that had the second lowest red zone rushing rate in the entire NFL last year. Well, guess what? With Trevor Lawrence added, with Darrell Bevell added, I do think that's going to step up. Again, with Trevor Lawrence added, you're going to get more overall opportunities inside the red zone. And with Darrell Bevell added, he had the 11th highest red zone rushing rate in the league last year, comparatively to the Jaguars' second lowest. I do think it's going to kind of balance each other out in terms of what we should expect with this team being able to run the ball more in the red zone. And if that's the case, people automatically want to pigeonhole James Robinson as this team's red zone back. Well, Travis Etienne, do not count him out in that regard. People want to make this stigma about skinnier running backs. They can't score. You want a big, bulky tone setter to smash it on the 1 yard line and establish it on the goal line. Well, guess what? Aaron Jones may very well be the best overall back in the red zone that we've seen in quite some time. Best overall goal line rushing back. And he's what, 210 pounds, 250
and Kamara
pounds?
is probably one of the best too. And Etienne weighed 215 at his pro day. So he's like the same size as those guys.
And it's funny when you compare them, because in terms of actual efficiency in these situations, Travis Etienne has been phenomenal in the red zone as a running back. Talking about inside the 10-yard line, turned 18 rushing attempts into 8 touchdowns and had a 45% touchdown rate in 2020. Inside the 20, turned 23 attempts into 10 touchdowns. And on 26 attempts in 2019, he broke 11 tackles. I mean, this is a guy who is both efficient, fluid, and has that nose for the end zone that we look for in our running backs. So just because James Robinson was here last year, just because he's a bulkier back, do not automatically assign him this role. And let me tell you, if Travis Etienne gets that goal line role and is going to be this team's leading receiving back, as we should expect, because is James Robinson going to out-target him? Is Carlos Hyde going to out-target him? No. Travis Etienne is going to be that team's main leading receiving back on third down. If he gets any type of goal line role, which I expect to be the case, we could be talking about a guy at RB23 ADP, could return significant value. But at the same time, if he's viewed as that Kadarius Toney replacement, because guess what? Urban Meyer wanted Kadarius Toney. If he's viewed as that gadget player, 10, 11 touches per game, RB23 you're going to spend on him, and he's going to end up being RB30 on the year. You're not going to be too thrilled. But I just don't see them spending the 25th overall pick on a gadget player. They already have that in Laviska Shenault. They didn't need to get another gadget player. And they should have just saved us the headache and just hopefully fucking the Giants could have just passed on to the Kadarius Toney so the Jaguars could get him next time. But because of this ambiguity, I feel like personally I'm getting a value at Travis Etienne currently going off the board just on the edge of the RB2 range.
Yeah, he's a very divisive topic for people. I know some people that are like, how are you guys letting this guy get to the 4th round? He's a 1st round running back. He's going to get the volume. He's going to get the carries. I definitely think that's in the range of outcomes. That he steps in and he's a 65, 70% opportunity share running back. They use James Robinson in the dirty carries that we don't even care about for fantasy anyway. Travis Etienne gets the goal line work, gets the receiving work, and he's the big play threat, right? You have the quote on Urban Meyer talking about how he loves speed. Like, we got that out of Travis Etienne, right? We saw the home run plays when he was at Clemson. He has all of the major fantasy ceiling type of attributes that we want from a running back. And James Robinson doesn't. Really, all James Robinson does is be good at everything, but not great at anything. And Etienne is great at a lot of things. So that's where we get the ceiling out of Etienne. The boom is very obvious, but the bust is, man, they could 50-50 timeshare this shit. They could turn Etienne into freaking Percy Harvin, and he'll just be useless for fantasy at that point.
Hey, Corey. So James Robinson's pretty decent at everything. You know, he may just very well be a Jag.
Yeah, he might be a Jag. Yeah, that's factual. Yeah. And of course, we should mention too, the reason that he's going to be so good in the receiving game too is he's got his quarterback with him, right? From Clemson. Yeah. He's threw him a lot of passes. Travis Etienne led at the NCAA in receptions last year.
Yep.
Right? Like he's a receiving back. People didn't think he was a receiving back early in his career, and he wasn't, but he got better at it. And that's why he stayed an extra year at Clemson instead of coming out last year, because I mean, good on him. He wouldn't have been a first round pick last year, and he was this year.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And when you're talking about that, I'm glad you mentioned it. You talked about Trevor Lawrence trying to transition into the NFL. Guess what? The best outlet for him to transition into the NFL as a passer is going to be his running back that he spent the last 3 years with Travis Etienne. I would be shocked if we're talking about Travis Etienne receiving less than 70 targets next year. And I know that sounds crazy considering that he is a rookie. He's kind of incomplete as an overall player. I just don't see, if he's on the field with Trevor Lawrence, him not getting game plan touches, crafted touches. And again, as I mentioned, if you're doing projections right now, he's probably, for the most part, given the range of outcomes, going to end up at RB23. But with those type of players with high ceilings, yet still meeting projections based on their ADP, I'm chasing that ceiling. Again, you're getting Travis Etienne probably around the 4 or 5 type of area, probably early 5th round is around where I usually see him go. Well, we actually have it right here, 56 overall. That's just about what, 5th round?
Yeah, if he's your third running back and you already have 2 running backs studs, let's say you get, Akers and Gibson the first 2 rounds, you get Keenan Allen and Amari Cooper with your next 2 picks. Travis Etienne's your 5th overall player that you're drafting. He definitely has that kind of ceiling. He'd be a flex option for you in most cases, right? So that's where the appeal is with Travis Etienne. I don't think his price is terrible. I think if you're getting him in the 5th round, I think that's a good price for him. It's if we start seeing him in camp and if we start seeing him in preseason games and his price creeps up to that 3rd, 4th round range, then I'm probably going to be out on the guy.
Yeah, at the current cost of acquisition, I'm willing to take the risk in case he busts because I think the ceiling is that high. However, again, the risk is totally there. I mentioned it. He could be the next Kadarius Toney. Maybe he's Percy Harvin. You never know. Fucking Urban Meyer has so many fucking plans up his sleeve. You never know what's going on with him. He actually recently quoted out as saying that his main thing on offense is just adding speed. He doesn't care where it fucking comes from, whether it's from the backfield, whether it's from the receiving position. He views Travis Etienne as this ultimate chess piece. And
that sounds good in theory for fantasy, but it probably isn't. We just want the guy to get 20 carries a game and 6 receptions a game. We don't want him to get, designed like outlet screens.
I don't need him to be Percy Harvin. I need him to be Aaron Jones. Come on.
Exactly. Yeah, that's the exact point. And like Danny said, it could have saved us a lot of trouble if the Giants would have passed on Kadarius Toney and I would have just faded the shit out of Kadarius Toney for the Jaguars. And then hopefully the ETN would have slid to the Jets in the 2nd round or something like that. That would have been just phenomenal. But if do you have anything else on ETN or should we get out of here?
No, I'm good here.
Yeah. All right. So that was our boomer bust players for quarterbacks and running backs. Tomorrow we will be coming at you guys with some wide receivers and tight ends. If you guys enjoyed this video, as always, like, comment, subscribe. Our official sponsor, Underdog, is running a new contest right now where they have $5 basically mini Best Ball Mania contest where it's like a $50,000 prize pool. So a little bit more achievable than the full-on $1 million contest that the Best Ball Mania 2 is. So if you haven't already done so, please go ahead and use our promo code FSE. You can see it at the bottom of the screen right now. Link will be in the description. For using our promo code and depositing, you do have to deposit once you use our promo code. $10, you'll get 25 free dollars. That's 5 entries into the puppy contest is what it's called. And you'll get both of our draft guides completely for free as a thank you for using our promo code. So if you haven't already done that, please go ahead and do so. Peace out, guys, and enjoy your Wednesday.